is our God. Sing with me, how great is our God, and all will see how great is our God.
All right, let's come back to class. And I just want to talk to you now about some of the details of sharing your vision. If we don't share our vision, people cannot connect. They can't partner, and they can't share in what God is doing. It's easier to be a Lone Ranger and do whatever you want. I don't know, some of you guys might be too young to remember the Lone Ranger. And I was trying to think before I was putting this together, what's a modern day equivalent of the Lone Ranger? Is there one? When I was a kid, there was this guy Rambo, but now I'm still even dating myself. Somebody that goes out, straps on all their guns and whatever, and they say, I can do it by myself. That's never been the way the kingdom of God's worked, and missions never works that way. So if we don't share the vision, we go out thinking that we can do it on our own, and we will quickly learn. And if you guys remember from culture level 2, we said if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. Meaning, you might go out for a quick sprint, and as Wes gave us the analogy of the man going to China, sold his house, sold whatever he had, and then he lived off his savings. How long did he last in China on his savings? Do you remember what he just told us the story about 10 minutes ago? How long did he last?
3 years.
3 years. So yeah, you can go out for 3 years, but when you're talking about learning some form of Chinese, Mandarin or Cantonese or some other dialect, that's a 7 or 8 year process. So you're only halfway done with learning language before you can disciple somebody, and your money's dried up. But when you partner with people, it's not a sprint, it's not a quick run, it's a marathon that continues forever. You pass the baton to the nationals, they pass it to another set of nationals, and you watch the gospel go out forever instead of going out quick and then failing. So why do we share? Because God wants to use everybody to be a part of the work that He's called you to. No Lone Rangers. We stir up the church when they see our willingness to leave everything. I can't tell you how many times people have said to me, because you're willing to do what you do, and now you've come to share at my church. And remember, that morning, they had never met me. By the end of the service, they said, because you're willing to do what you're going to do, my life will never be the same again. And I can remember living in a refugee camp and thinking, we're just like figuring out the language and figuring out the culture, and we're not seeing fruit in this refugee camp. So for the first year of my life overseas, I saw almost no fruit on the ground. I kept getting, at those days, snail mail letters. This is pre-email and pre-cell phones, right? So it was a while ago. I kept getting mail from the post office, and then in time emails that said, because you and your team are willing to go and live in that grass hut, we are willing to serve God here. Now when I was going out, I never imagined that just responding to God's call, and because God simply chose us by His grace to do this, responding to God's call would then affect America. So we affected more people in America on our first year than we did in Africa. That was an absolute eye-opener to me. So why do we share our vision? Because people need to be challenged by what God's calling you to do in your life. Also, when you share your vision, this is number 2, God begins to call people to do a great work on their own. Wes was the final spokesman at my church that sealed the deal. Rob, you're moving to Africa. No matter what you think or what you feel, once Wes got done with that message. And Wes did something that was new for me. He was a missionary that gave an altar call, not for salvation, but for commitment to Christ. And I'll never forget getting up from the soundboard and thinking, who's going to cover the soundboard? Because when the sound guy disappears, the church doesn't function. I didn't care at all. First time I ever abandoned my post at the soundboard as a pastor in that early 10 years of church was when Wes said, come forward. It was like God picked me up and I rushed down there because I just wanted to stand right there, not in the presence of some guy or the church watching me, but in the presence of God that was so heavy on that room. I had never felt the Spirit like that. Who was it? Just some guy I'd never met. Some guy that called my pastor on the phone and said, Pastor Trent, you need me to come to your church. And I'm thinking, man, talk about like getting yourself out there. Because I asked Trent later, I said, Trent, how did you get Wes to come to church? He goes, he called me. And I was studying the book of Acts, and we were praying about missions, but we didn't really know any missionaries. We were just a little church and a bunch of young people, and we see it in the book. But we didn't know who was doing it. I pick up the phone one day, and it's this guy, and he was telling story after story, and I couldn't put the phone down. And he says, you need me to come to your church and stir up your body for what God wants to do. Praise the Lord that our pastor picked up that phone, invited some unknown soldier missionary guy to show up, and when he got done with his message and he gave an altar call, my wife, myself, and my team, which at that time we were just friends, we weren't like the team going to Africa, God just sealed it right there at that moment. Why do we speak at churches? So that God can call people to further ministry. Now, when I speak at a church, I was at a church last week for the first time. I'll be at a church, in a couple days. This will be my 5th time going back. No matter what church I'm going to, I spend the first half of the message talking about how God wants to use them right where they are. And I tell some amazing story about how God's used somebody else that I know or I've met or I've learned about and how they're being used in America. Then I do the second half about Africa or South Sudan or Asia or wherever, because I want people to be stirred up to do further ministry. A pastor told me the other day, and I might have shared this with you before, and he said, I asked him, because I'm on his board, so we meet at the board meeting after church, we were counting tithes and talking about the big budget, the budget for the whole year, and looking at the big picture of the church. And I said, does it ever hurt your church when I come? Because when I come, I raise money for what I do. He goes, absolutely not. You're in the back raising $15 a month for a kid, or to sponsor one of your missionaries, or to fund the medical clinic. But when you leave the next week, and the 2 months after, our tithe goes up every time. Because the people are stirred. So I'm not taking from the church, or I should say I'm not taking away from the church. I'm giving the people in the church an avenue, not only to be challenged, but to be financially invested into what God's doing amongst unreached people groups. And their pastors always say, whenever you come, and Wes and I both speak at a lot of the same churches, whenever you or Wes come, our church is left passionate to do local ministry and give locally. So are we taking from the church? Never. Number 3, God will call others to partner with you when you share. And this is something about the financial part, and I've mentioned it a little bit, but you remember the story, I think I told it last week, of my one donor, my one supporter that said, if you don't give me the opportunity or the option to support your work, you're robbing me of using my blessing. You're stealing from me. I had lunch with a guy the other day. He was a really wealthy guy. He owns this huge company in LA. And I think he's probably pushing about 80 years old. He's maybe 78, 79 years old. Guy's on fire. And I said to him, I'll just call him brother because he's a huge donor. I don't want to kind of give out his name. I said, brother, how do you know Wes? Because I know that you gave to Wes, and Wes gave that money that you gave to him to me, and then now you're giving to me through another ministry. How do you know everything? Or how do you know us? And he goes, I remember the first day that Wes walked into the church. Just got off the plane from some trip to Russia. He had this old shirt on and these old pair of pants, and he barely had any money in his pocket, but he was passionate about what God was going to do. And when I heard that boy, and he's calling Wes a boy, that's how old this guy is. When I heard that boy speak, I knew I'm going to support him the rest of my life. So Wes named one of his castle training bases after this guy. And the guy came out to visit, and he's like, why'd you put my name on it? He goes, you've been like a father to me. You see the sharing in the ministry? People are looking for places to financially invest. And if we don't give them that option, they won't have the ability to do it. And I'll tell you this, they look around and they say, who do we give to? Because there's all these big names out there, but we don't know them. We want to give to people that we know. Now this whole thing isn't all about money, but I'll tell you this, what makes the ministry move with all the practicals, what feeds the kids? It's finances. And so we have to switch into that gear of making it possible for people to do that. Pastor Trent talked to us last week about Philippians, and we looked at chapter 1, verses 3 through 7, where Paul says, I'm thankful for you, your partnership in the gospel from the first day until now. Because of this, I hold you dear in my heart because we're partakers of the grace of God together. God has given me a massive family within the Calvary Chapel churches because I get on the phone. I call the pastors. Some pastors don't want to talk on the phone, so I show up at their church and I say to them, can I take you out to coffee? And if they don't want to do that, I hand them my card and I give them what I call my 2-minute speech. This is what God's doing in my ministry, and if you want to be involved, it'll change your church forever. And they say, thank you for coming. We've been praying, just like my church was praying for somebody to come, and Wes called on the phone. People say it to me all the time. So as God's calling us out, He's calling us to partner with many for that exact reason. Did I give you guys the rope analogy last week? I held up the rope and I showed you the rope with all the fibers on it. I said, every person is one of these little fibers, and collectively together, I didn't bring a rope because I thought I gave you guys the analogy. I did it before, maybe in level 2 or whatever. Here's the rope analogy. And I do this at a church. I hold up a rope, and I take a short rope about this long, and I tie a knot on each end, and I fray the ends of it. And I say to the people, you see the frayed parts of this rope? And then maybe there's like 1,000 little frays, which are like as big as a thread, each one of them. I said, each one of these frays is a person in the fellowship. And when each of us begin praying, begin supporting financially, and begin to get behind this ministry, and collectively together we create a rope that will be broken. Because there's a group of people called the missionaries that are going to lower themselves down into these intense places on the earth where the gospel has never been heard. And as they're lowering themselves down, they don't want to feel forgotten. And when they know that somebody's on the other end of that rope, it gives them so much courage. They say, if you, 10 of you, 20 of you hold the one side of the rope, and I go down on the other side, I know that you have one side, I've got the other. So when William Carey went out, we know that William Carey is the father of modern missions. Hudson Taylor, William Carey, a couple of these key guys in this key time in missions history. When William Carey went out, he said to a group of 5 men in England, if you're willing to hold the rope in England, I'm willing to go to India. He spent the rest of his life there. Not one of those guys ever stopped holding that rope. And he said, I know that when everything else has failed here, that you guys are praying, supporting, and you're there for me. So we call it holding the rope. People want to hold the rope. They know that they're not called oftentimes to move to a foreign country, but they want to be involved. So we must give them that opportunity. Romans chapter 10, I already quoted it earlier. Romans 10, 14 and 15, we all know it. It's the famous missionary verse. How then are they to call on him in whom they have not believed? Or how are perishing immortal souls going to find a way to be delivered from that concept of eternal death? They are to do that by believing. How are they to believe in him in whom they have never heard? And how are they to hear without someone preaching? So that's verse 14. Then Paul says in verse 15, and how are they to preach unless they are sent? So there's this marriage, there's this partnership, there's this connectivity. Why do we share? So that we can be sent. If we're not sent by a church, we're going out in an unbiblical manner. Now, of course, the Lord's always going to be with us. We know that. When the Great Commission was given, Jesus said, go into all the world and I will be with you. I really actually don't need anything else except to know that the Lord is with me. But when the Lord here tells me, I want to not only be with you personally, I want to send you through a body. I want to give people on the other end a rope to hold on to while you're on that end. And in time, as we do the work of the ministry, we share. We come back to America, we share again, and we're going back and forth. The people holding that rope is now in the thousands. The thousands. How many people have been affected by a few key voices in their lives when it comes to modern missions? In Calvary, we could say somebody like Chuck has affected every one of us. But how about KP Yohannan? He's affected us as well. You guys know KP Yohannan? Okay, I'm not speaking to, but he was the guy that came to my church and introduced me to the reality of perishing, immortal souls, because he was one. And someone risked their life and gave him the gospel in India. So KP turned me on to the reality of it. Wes Bentley sealed it, and I went out, and now God's using me to do the same exact thing. And I'm thinking, how in the world did this happen? I was a sound man. I was an electrician. I didn't have any aspirations to go beyond that because I was totally satisfied with what the Lord had. And then the Lord said, Rob, not only go do the work, but come home and share the work. Share it constantly. Go into schools. Go into anybody that will hear from you and share with them. I'll never forget the day that I went to my grandmother's retirement home filled with pastor missionaries that were now retired, and half the building was wheelchairs. Okay, so one half was pews, like fixed pews. The other half was open floor, so they could bring in the wheelchairs. And I just talked to them about Africa, and they were weeping, just weeping. I'm like, if I did everything overseas for this one moment, it's to bless these people. So what if I came home and just said, okay, Lord, I'm just going to pray, and you're just going to do it. I'm not going to talk to anybody because I really don't want to. I would have robbed those people of their ability to be a part of it. Yes?
I just, as Pastor Trent was talking about connecting with your church,
Right.
having that home church, and then I sent my first email out to speak at a church, my mother's church,
Right.
and I'd never done that before, so I was just not even certain if that's something people do. From what you're saying is
Yeah, so Wes
do that.
will actually, now remember, everybody's unique. You're never going to find two pastors that do it exactly the same way. You'll never find two missionaries that do it the same way either. So you have your personality, you're going to be unique. Wes's personality, as you can hear, is direct, bold, to the point. I've got one thing to do, right? You get that with Wes? There's not like 10 agendas. There's one agenda. Wes will get out the yellow pages. This is in the old days, right? Now he uses Google. And he'll call every single church in an entire city and share with them. So he'll spend 2-3 hours every day on the phone. He's booked out for 2 years, normally 2 years. So if there's 52, 53 Sundays in a year, Wes is booked out for 100 Sundays.
Well, I remember being on
So,
mission.
but you follow me on that, okay? So for me, I'm not like that. It's really weird for me to call people on the phone that I've never met and just say, you need me to fill your pulpit so I can tell you about my ministry. I don't communicate that way. Wes has no problem. He's just, boom, right? He drops it. I'm not that personality. And I could try to be Wes, but I'm not. I'm me. So what I do is I connect with guys individually. And I talk to them. I'm coming to pastors' conferences, pastors' breakfasts. I call people on the phone that if I know them. And I'll tell you this, that when you are referred to a new pastor by somebody he trusts, that's the open door. Okay? So if it's your mom's church, you have your mom call them. Now it's weird with parents, like, of course every parent's going to love their kid's ministry, right? But oftentimes, like my grandmother's church, before she was in this rest home and she was the deaconess of missions, she told her pastor, you got to have my grandson share. And he's like, yeah, it's your grandson. Of course I have to have him share. I got up there, and it was one of the first times I ever spoke publicly like that. I had pastored, but never spoke on missions. I shared two or three photos. I shared the story. Pastor's like, when can you come back? I've gone back twice a year, every year for like 15 years. Anytime the pastor's out of town, he calls me up and says, you're going to come up and fill the pulpit. It's like it's a given. Because I had that one opportunity to do it, we're actually really close friends because of that. Okay, so we're good with that. We've got to share, we've got to get out there. All right, public speaking, do's and don'ts. I wanted Wes to share his do's and don'ts. At the same time, I really want to give you more of a Bible college take on the do's and don'ts. And so I want to look at a few key things. Number one, public speaking do's and don'ts. Cottonmouth is the worst thing that can happen to any new public speaker. You guys all spoken publicly? Been in a pulpit? Look out there and all of a sudden, all those things that are in your mind, what happens to them? They just go blank, right? True story. First time I shared at a church other than mine was Calvary Chapel Refuge. Pastor Bill, great guy. You guys all know Bill Welsh, great guy. Bill says, Rob, I heard you and your team, and there's like 6 or 7 of us or whatever. We heard you moving to Africa, and we had Wes Bentley share, and he told us that you were going. Why don't you come and share at our Sunday night service? Now I knew that he wasn't going to have me in a Sunday morning service because I wasn't ready for that at all. So he goes, I'm going to give you a Sunday night. So I get up to the pulpit and man, I'm excited. I got my notes and passion and God's call on my life and I've done a vision tour and man, this is going to be awesome. I get up and I say, hi. And as I did that, my tongue stuck to the roof of my mouth. It stuck to the roof of my mouth so bad, I couldn't get it off. And I wasn't joking. There was no water or whatever up with the speaker. It was stuck there. Now, Bill, if you guys know Bill, Bill's a funny guy, right? He's in the front row just chuckling. He's like, what? Let's see how long it takes Rob to squirm out of this. I'm sitting there and I'm all, And finally, Andrew Russell, which is now their church planter in Australia, was the missions pastor then. He goes running and back, realizing 30 seconds, a minute goes by, Rob can't move his tongue. And I'm just sitting there totally embarrassed. I was like ready to walk out the back door. He comes up with a glass of water. I open it up. I break out this intense cottonmouth that I never knew was even real. And the message went great. What did God teach me? Be ready. Every time I go up on the pulpit, I have a piece of gum. This is the nuts and bolts. I have a piece of gum right here in my cheek. So that if I start to get cotton mouth, because it just happens all of a sudden, I don't expect it, I don't think it's going to happen, I take the gum out and I start chewing it as I'm talking. And that releases it. I talked to another friend of mine, his name is Emil Zwane, or Easy. He works for Ray Comfort. He speaks at these massive conferences. I said, Easy, how do you do it? He goes, I put a Tic Tac on both sides. So the Tic Tac is slowly melting away and my mouth is salivating as I'm public speaking. Because you're excited about it and you see the pulpit and you got no hindrances in your heart, and you get up there and all of a sudden there's like 5,000 people staring at you and you freeze. It's just a psychological thing, okay? Another point is, you see how short these little cups are? Oh, yeah, perfect example. Let me see your cup. Never take one of these on the pulpit if you can help it, and never, if you're in a ministry, give this to a pastor, because as he's doing this, do you hear these sounds? This is horrible. Okay, and I'm just letting this happen in the microphone for anybody listening on a recording. Horrible. You want something small, something short that doesn't crinkle. Okay? You guys follow me on that? Because all you really need is a tip. You don't need a big old thing, okay? More nuts and bolts, do it room temperature. Cold water freezes the throat. Warm water, room temperature water, opens it up. So that was Cottonmouth. That's one of my favorite stories ever. Church meetings. What do I share? What do I not share? Because this is one of the major questions. What do I share? What do I not share? Be brief and be on time. Meaning, be there, set up, get the mic, talk to the pastor, the whole thing. And when you're allowed to get up to that pulpit, don't ask how much time do I have. Ask when do I need to be done. So I carry with me on my phone, like right now it's being used as my remote control. I also have this app, it's called a Nightstand, and you see how it's the time right now. And if it's a really bright room, I bring it really bright up, because sometimes those spotlights are intense. If it's a real dark room, I bring it way down, because if not, I got this shining thing on my face. What does this do for me? This tells me when I'm supposed to be done. So I don't set a timer, because this is going to be later, that's going to be early. I say to the pastor, do you want me off the pulpit at 9:35? And I see 9:34, and I'm out of there. I'm done. And so this is something, even I was doing a conference with David Gusick. You guys all know David? And David and I were doing a conference, and he saw this and he goes, where'd you get that? I just imagined that there had to be an app for it somewhere, and we found it. So Dave and I are sharing this app. I mean, the guy is a major speaker, and he's like, where'd you find it? So just a couple more details. On the corner, it tells me what my battery life is, because the last thing I want is for my phone to go dead while it's happening. So I'll actually bring it down to there if my battery's starting to go low. These are things that pastors, that they value it in their guest speakers. I can trust that so-and-so is going to be given this much time and they're going to stick to it. So sometimes your messages are long, sometimes they're short. Every missionary should be able to give what we call an elevator speech. Have you guys ever heard the term elevator speech? That means within 30 seconds to 2 minutes, you can tell somebody what you want them to know. You get in the elevator with somebody and they say, hey, I saw your photo, or I heard something about you. What do you do? Now, you don't have 20 minutes in an elevator. That's why we call it an elevator speech. 30 seconds, maybe a minute, maybe just outside the elevator, you should be able to tell them what they do. So somebody says to me, Rob, what do you do? Now, of course, I could go way back to the beginning and I could walk you all the way forward to 20 years of ministry. Oftentimes, I'll say to them, if they're not saved, I work with people that are in a war zone. They cannot help themselves. So we go in and we find people that are trapped, and we provide schooling and we provide medicine for them. And every time they say, well, why do you do that? And they say, well, I met Jesus and Jesus did it for me. And so now that's what we're doing, is we're doing humanitarian work because of Jesus' love, and we're showing them who God is. So the gospel always makes it in, but I don't start with the gospel if they're unsaved. So that's what we call the elevator speech. Now, if a pastor says you've got 15 minutes, I take the entire ministry and I shrink it down to a 15-minute message. Oftentimes pastors will say, here is the entire Sunday. Like Wes said, it's been 20 years since he shared a brief message at a meeting. For me, it's been probably 5 since I've had one of those like little announcement segments. Now I tell a pastor, if you want me to come, you need to give me the whole message. I'll bring the word, I'll encourage the people, and I'll talk about what God's doing overseas. And then I'll tell that pastor, if you want to, you can call this person a big mega church or this person a small little church, because the small guys won't call the mega churches for a reference, but they will call other small churches. So you have that, and you can say, I can do it in 5 minutes, 15 minutes, or 45 minutes. Whatever you want is how we'll do it. And you can imagine, with time on the mission field, there's always stories to tell. So as you have those stories ready, then you share them. So you're brief, you're to the point, and you share the message clearly. Now, when thinking about these messages, everybody has what we call a signature message, going back to personality. Wes has been doing it for so many years that he might have 20 45-minute messages that are in his mind at any time. And as he's going to a church, he's praying, Lord, should it be this message about that war, or this message about that battle, or this message about this situation? At the moment, I would say I have about maybe 7 or 8. This is Sunday morning messages, not Bible college messages or teaching the Word. That goes on forever. With like teaching the book of Romans, it's 100 messages. I'm talking about ones that I want to bring to a church from me, from the ministry that I'm a part of, to the people. And so pretty much every 6 months, the Lord adds a new message to what's in my heart. So is it okay to repeat a message? Absolutely. You don't have to go to a church and and have a new message for every single church. That'd be like Chris Tomlin showing up at your church and playing a brand new song at every church. No, you want to hear how great is our God, or you want to hear a good, good Father, or something that you love by that artist. Missionaries are very similar to that. They have a signature message. When Wes shows up, we know what we're going to get. We're going to get Wes Bentley and the war in South Sudan, and if we don't leave that building more fired up for Jesus, we didn't hear Wes speak. And so pastors aren't looking for a brand new message in every service, because you get that sense, you get that feel. Talk about what God's done. Share those stories. And you can mix and match stories. You can mix and match scriptures. Whatever God's leading you to do. I never go to a church and just have a coined message. It's always, Lord, what scripture do you want for those people? What American analogy can I use for those people? What story from Africa is going to fit best for those people? And then as I pray about that, my wife always says, why does it take you 8 hours to get ready for a message you've already taught? I said, because I'm praying about that particular church. But I'll tell you this, I've said every word I'm going to say somewhere at some church, and it's just in my heart overflowing. But I'm praying about how to craft it for that particular church. So those are called signature messages. We all have them. The next thing, and stop me if you guys have any questions, I'm just going to crank forward here. The next thing is speak clear. Speak slow if you have to. I have to slow down my speech oftentimes. In Bible college, I speed it up. Because you guys know me, we're together here. I was at a church just a couple days ago, and the guy pulled me aside and he goes, you remind me of, who was it? Calvary Chapel, South Bay. He just passed away, Steve Mays. Steve Mays was missing part of his tongue. Steve Mays had to go through speech therapy when he was a kid. That's why he spoke so methodically. You guys ever listen to Steve Mays? Very methodical. Well, sometimes when I'm at a church, I get too excited. So I slow it down and I act like I'm in Africa, where English is like their 5th language. And I slow it down. J. Vernon McGee, Chuck Smith speed. And as I slow it down, no matter who's in the audience, they can connect with me. So even if I'm not covering all the text, I'm covering it in such a steady way that people are engaging with it. So you speak clearly, you speak loud enough for them to hear, right? And if you're going to whisper, you whisper loud. It's something that you'll learn. At the same time, you don't get so excited that you're shouting at them. This isn't hyper-Pentecostalism. This is passion. Passion's different than shouting. And if you heard Wes tonight, did he raise his voice at all? Was it one of the most powerful things you've ever heard? But yet the guy almost whispered the whole time, just because of his presence. So everybody has their own personality. Be who God's made you. Never use the word from the pulpit. If I use it in class, tell me. Honestly, if I use it in class, tell me. Pastor friend of mine had the ums edited out of his message. I talked to the guy that did the editing. It was one of my techie buddies, and you got these guys in the background. You're like, how does that all work? And he said, do you know, I edited 75 uhs and ums out of one Sunday morning message from that pastor. I'm thinking that pastor should have been ashamed of himself. What was he doing on the pulpit? Wasting those people's times. It's better to be silent than to say, Notice that Chuck Smith would have these huge times of silence. Have you ever noticed it? He was thinking about what he was going to say. Instead of stuttering, he just smiled at him. You guys all know what Chuck's saying?
Yeah.
I can't do it, I'm not with Chuck. We could sit there for a whole minute watching him smile at us. I was in Bible college listening to him on recording, and I would think, the recorder's broken, like check the batteries. He was just smiling. The church felt what? The love. I'm on the radio driving around thinking, did the radio break? You ever been like that with Chuck? Like you're checking the station? Chuck was just pausing. Don't say something when there's nothing to be said. God will work. It's the anointing. It's not the stuttering. Never, ever say Practice with your friends before you get up to the pulpit. And if you catch yourself saying don't get all condemned. Just stop doing it. That's it. Just stop doing it. There's no place in the ministry for ums and ahs and it drives me crazy. We're here for excellence. We're not here to stutter. Introduce yourself. Every message that I teach, I start with a picture of my family. I have the title of the message, like lift up your eyes and look at the fields and something about missions. And then I go from that to a picture of my family. Why? Because people want to connect with the guy talking to them. They don't know me. They've never met me. Their pastor knows me or heard about our ministry from another pastor. So I get up and I tell a story. You guys, probably some of you have been to a Sunday morning message that I teach. I get up and I show a picture of myself and my wife, and I say, when we got married, we never thought we would move overseas, and then God did this work, but in the midst of that, my wife tried to have kids. We couldn't have kids at all. She had a miscarriage. She was devastated. As soon as I mention the word miscarriage, half the audience is like this. We've been through that. You mean you're like us? And I said, yeah, and the doctors told us during this season that we had to have a test tube baby, an in vitro child, which means they take from the man, they take from the woman, they make a baby in a test tube, and then they wait for those eggs to fertilize, and they reimplant them in the woman, and hopefully the woman has a healthy delivery. And I was like, you know what? That's okay for others. I'm not condemning anybody that does it. But for us, that's not where we're going. We're moving overseas. And we get overseas, and God gives us a child naturally. And then I'm showing you a picture of my family. And I said, and then God gives us this beautiful blonde-haired, blue-eyed girl, and we give her an African name, and all the moms are like, oh, this is so amazing. And I say, so she's my African-American daughter, blue-eyed, blonde hair, right? Then I say that by my other two ones, we came home, then we had two more, and we moved to Asia. So I have one African-American and two Asian Americans, a place for erupts and laughter. And what's just happened? Connection. Connection. It's not an amazing story. It's connection. People want to be connected with people that are speaking to them. They don't know me. They might not see me for the rest of their life. Maybe they won't see me for another year. But now they're connected. And then I go into what we're doing, how it's working, and I begin to work them through something. Once they have a sense of relationship with you, then there's a trust that's built. So as you're speaking, they're not only connecting to what you're saying, they're connecting to you as a person. And they're saying, if God could call them to do that, God could call me to do whatever He wants me to do. And this is where it starts to become real for the people. This is where I believe public speaking matters. And I'm spending time on this because this is something that you only get one chance with those people if they're not part of your family or your home church. And if you're in a new church every week, like a lot of us are, I only get one chance with those people. I'm going to make the most of it. So I'm going to spend the first 2 minutes connecting them with my family and our ministry. Talk about God's greatness. Talk about what God is doing. Not about you. Of course, talk about your call to stir them up, but talk about God's greatness. There's a man that comes back from the mission field and he shares at our church, and our church has so many missionaries and missionary messages that we actually don't do a lot of missionary Sundays because they would happen all the time, and then people would be like, we're trying to figure out how to take care of our kids or get a better marriage, and all we hear is missions, missions, missions. So our pastor switched it around to balance it out, and he said to my friend Bond, I think he's going to be one of our guest speakers, he's just arrived like a week ago. He said, Bond, don't share on missions, just share on discipleship or marriage or whatever. Bond gets up and just starts talking about God and who God is. And of course, he'll slip in a story about Nepal or India or wherever he's working in northern Uganda. My wife came home from that church. I was speaking at another church. She goes, I love it when Bond speaks. When he speaks, Jesus just flows out of him. I don't care what he's doing or where he's going or how much money he needs. I'm on board with him. Because he's got Jesus, and when he speaks, Jesus just pours out. Talk about God's greatness. Talk about who God is. Talk about what God is doing in your life. Be funny without telling corny jokes, right? Be funny without telling corny jokes. When I tell people I have one African American and two Asian Americans, and the picture behind me is three blonde-haired, blue-eyed kids, that's funny to them. They laugh. Do you know who laughs the loudest? Are the Asians and the African Americans in the audience. I was at Calvary Chapel Signal Hill this week, which is right here in Long Beach, right by the Long Beach airport. It was a lot of Asians and a lot of African Americans. They died laughing, and they're like, this is awesome, we like you. You may be white, but we like you. Right? They don't say that. I was being African about that one. You've been through my culture class. We did culture afterwards on Sunday night. We had a ripping time with these guys. Be funny, but don't tell stupid jokes. Have this sense of, as you're speaking, what I would think of as Jesus when he spoke. People were drawn to him because he was filled with life. He was filled with love. He was connected to them. Be connected to your audience without trying too hard. Be serious without condemning. Be serious without condemning. I think Wes just did a great job for that with us in this last session. So serious, you're like, can I breathe when he's speaking? Can I even move? You get that feeling, without condemning.
You can say a couple of jokes.
He could, but he's a soldier.
Yeah.
Soldiers rarely tell jokes, right? I'm an electrician and a pioneer missionary. So my personality is going to be a little bit different. While KP Yohanan over here on this side, he's this crazy Asian guy that's like flying off the handle. And when he tells a joke, he doesn't mean to tell a joke. He's just being Asian, and we all die laughing, right? You follow me on that? I mean, seriously, and he knows it too. I've had friends who work for him really closely. We had a lot of fun talking about what KP is like in a staff meeting. Be funny without corny jokes. Be serious without being condemning. There's no need to condemn. There's no need to say, if you don't do it, then you're not walking with God, and you're not a real man, or you're not a real woman. There's no need for that stuff. Just talk about what God's doing, and everybody's going to say, I really need to step it up. My prayer life needs to change. I need to begin focusing on the Lord. Tell at least one clear, key story. I was asked to teach on Father's Day, which I don't want to do a missions message on Father's Day. That just felt weird to me. This was at a church that I had spoken at 7 times previously in the past 5 years. So they knew me. They knew everything about what we were doing. And I think I just did a missions message 3 months earlier. The pastor had some kind of a throat cancer, and he called me up last minute and said, it's Father's Day, can you come and share? Because he was in a part of a community where he didn't have anybody else to call on. And I said, sure, I'll drive out, no problem. So I get there, I'm like, but I'm going to share on missions, but I'm going to share on being a father. So I started with the story of the girl that her father was going to sell her into slavery. And it was a story of redemption. So I tell the story of the girl in Africa. Within 3 minutes, the entire place is on the edge of their seats like, that's what a father should be, one that's willing to lay down his life for his family. And then I said, now turn to Deuteronomy 6. And let's look at what it means to be a godly father. And I went into the whole normal California American fatherly message. But I started with a story. And it wasn't just a mission story. It was a story that engaged their hearts to the subject. And it wasn't a story that I read. And you can use those. I mean, if you don't travel, of course, there are not that many stories in our communities that really engage people because everybody knows those stories. If you have to read them, read them. Either way, start with a story. Start with a story from another missionary. I'll do missionary biographies. You guys have been in the missionary biography classes. Just telling somebody else's story is overwhelming. So I've got my stories, I got Wes's stories, I got all these other guys' stories that I know, and then there's all these missionary biography stories. Engage the people with a story, especially if you're just getting started. You might not have really good stories. What do you do when you tell that story? You paint a picture. You paint a picture for somebody that's never been there and probably will never go there. So you put yourself in the shoes of the brand new missionary and you think, okay, when I arrive on that street, what's it feel like? What's it, the temperature-wise on my skin? What are the smells in the air? What are the sights that I'm seeing? What's happening in my heart as I'm being overwhelmed by all of these sensations? You tell the story in that way, and the people feel like they're there. Now, if you can show a photo, make sure it's a good photo. We want photos that are close-up of people's faces. No backs of heads, no big groups. People's faces. People connect with people. They don't connect with groups. If the photo's not clear, ditch it. Just tell the story. But if you can get a photographer that's been there with you, or you have a phone or whatever, and you can take a photo like that, you can download these photos from the internet. You can just put in South Sudan war. I'm not in that war all the time. I don't have pictures of guys with machine guns right in front of me. So I'll download a picture and I'll say, I got this picture off the news. So I'm not claiming that I took it, but that's a picture of what I'm saying. And so I show it one clean photo of a person, and I talk about their life, their situation, and how God's going to do miracles in their world. So we show one photo if we can. We share at least one story. We can share more, but at least one. Make sure it's clear. Make sure it's concise. Make sure it's to the point. Videos are great. Never let the videos go beyond 5 minutes. 2 minutes is really minimum, because you can't do a lot in 30 seconds or do a lot in a minute, because you're kind of engaging somebody into the thought within that first 30 seconds. By the end of 5 minutes, you should be able to do the whole thing. So you may open with a video to kind of set the stage that helps them paint that picture. And then you do your message, share about what you're doing, or you do your message and you close your video. You just pray about it. You see what works best. Bring somebody that really loves you, that's willing to speak to you, to a message that you speak at, and ask them, tell me what I did right. Tell me what I did wrong. My wife's my greatest critic. She'll say, wow, you really blew it on those first 5 minutes. I was fully disconnected. I lived it. And I was like twirling my hair and I didn't know what was going on, right? Well, I need to hear that, don't I? Bring a good friend with you and do that. So videos are good, at least 2, no more than 5. Do your best to make them professional. Don't just do a bunch of junk. With modern technology, videos should just be awesome. There's no other word for it. Videos should just be awesome. You can download things from a ministry called Grace Way Media. Grace Way Media is a keynote PowerPoint ministry. That's all they do, is they create slides for churches. Like, you're like, where did my pastor get that slide to fit so well with that title? He went to Grace Way Media. Everybody can use it. I think you have to pay for it. My church gives it to me for free. There's also a free one called Upsplash. Think about people just throwing water in the air. Upsplash Media. Some of the highest quality images of everything on earth. Pictures of people and landscapes and whatever you're doing. Totally free. Fully high def, a lot better than Grace Way Media, because they're not filled with titles and all that stuff. They're just the pictures. So if you're in my class, you'll see me throw up some photos and you'll think, did Rob really take that photo? No, I probably got it from Upsplash. If it's one of my people in South Sudan, yes, I took it. But if it's just some beautiful sunset, that wasn't mine. That was Upsplash Media. Utilize these things. Videographers and photographers are essential. One other thing about speaking publicly. Answer questions before people ask them. We talked about that in the last session. Imagine you'd never been there and somebody's telling you a story about it. What questions would you ask? What was it like? And what was your feeling when that was happening? And wait, go back and explain to me what a mud hut looks like. I've never really seen one. Answer those questions before they ask. And you don't have to go into detail, but as you're telling your story. Like, I just told you a story about in vitro. Have you guys ever heard of in vitro? Do you understand how in vitro works? Do you understand it now? Right? They take from the man, they take from the woman, they make a baby in a test tube, and then they reinsert it back into the woman. Now, that didn't take forever, did it? But we just talked about a very complex technical thing in less than 30 seconds. And so you paint the picture, you tell the story. Answer questions before they ask. A final thing on public speaking, be very careful with private details about your team and about the nationals. If you can't tell that story of that national in front of that national without them being shamed, embarrassed, whatever, don't tell that story publicly. The world is way too small for us to think that we can tell a story about somebody and it not to either get back to that person or break that person's heart if we do it wrong. And many of the places that we work in are shame and honor cultures. So if I'm going to tell a story about somebody, I ask them in advance, so-and-so, when I go back to America, can I tell your story to my people? And they'll always say yes. And I'll say to them, this is the way that I remembered the story. Do I have it correct? Because culturally, I might have misinterpreted something. So I get clearance before I tell people stories. Now, if it's my story or my wife or one of my close friends and we know each other and we're used to doing that, no problem. But never reveal people's struggles from the pulpit. When we get nervous in public speaking, somehow our logic switches off and we tell stories that we should never tell publicly. We shouldn't even tell them in a coffee shop about so-and-so had a cultural breakdown and they were crying and weeping and all this stuff. And I'll just be honest with you, in a missions class, so-and-so had their menstrual cycle and they were losing their mind. Shut up. Don't talk about stuff like that. What are you talking about? But people get nervous. People get nervous and they say that. So-and-so, the big macho man that we thought was like a soldier, he saw this little kid starving and he started weeping like a little baby. He's nothing but a girl. Look at that guy. I've heard missionaries say this. They get nervous and I'm like, just zip it, right? Write it down, practice it with somebody. Never reveal people's weaknesses. You can reveal your own weakness all you want. Never reveal anybody else's weaknesses. All right, with newsletters and blogs, it's pretty much the same thing. Let me just cover one thing. I've got one more minute with you guys. Let me just cover one more thing. What to share, what not to share. In a newsletter, be brief. Tell stories again. Use clear photos. Right? Wes is a great writer and a great storyteller. That's why he can get away with a 3-page newsletter. Now, notice with Wes's 3-page newsletter, how much text is on the front page? Mostly photo. How do you draw people in? Photo. This doesn't draw them in. That's why it's not this big. It's photo and text. And if you really want to know the basic of it, it's right here in red. You can't miss it. And because he's a good storyteller, he can go a little smaller inside, but notice the size of the photos? That's what it's all about. This is websites, printed material, anything. Be very, very clear and to the point with clear photos. Personal emails. What to share, what not to share. In writing emails to people, of course, don't reveal other people's weaknesses. Know that whatever you send an email could be public, and if it's seen from the wrong angle, it can be bad. When you're writing to family, don't share everything about the risk or the trial, because families tend to really worry. I've told missionaries and parents together as a missions pastor, I'm going to advise your child, which is now 25 years old, to not share everything with you, mom or dad, because mom's going to fret and dad's going to want to get on a plane and go conquer those people. But I want them to share with me, the missions pastor, every single intimate detail of their life. And if you can receive those details without getting emotional and telling them to come home because now your baby, which is 25 years old, your baby is in trouble, well, God's called them to that, and they need to go through it. So you be careful with what goes public. You also be careful with what goes to the family. And you then tell your missions leadership everything, because they need to know. We'll talk more about that when we're talking about personal security. Websites, blogs, and social media. When you put something on a website, it's there forever. You guys know that? You're living in the Google generation. Whatever you put up is there forever. It will not disappear. Recently, 3 days ago, I got an email from Nepal because a group of missionary friends of mine that I'm part of a kind of a ministry board, so we make decisions about it. They said, this is what's going on in Nepal. We were trying to do ministry in this certain valley, but missionaries came before us, and especially a short-termer. And the short-termer came and took pictures of this valley and said, the people are wonderful, but the darkness is overwhelming. They're trapped by Satan. And she puts this on a blog, puts this on a newsletter. The people in Nepal are reading this, right? So the Buddhists, the Hindus, the Hindu priest in Nepal, they go around and they begin interviewing the people that live there at the Christian school that are full-time missionaries. And in their interview, they conclude these people are trying to convert people. Well, Nepal has an anti-conversion law. So then they go to the newspaper and they say, print this in the newspaper. Here's the quote from the short-termer about we're all under Satan's power and this and that. They use terms unreached. They use the term living in darkness, need to be turned from the darkness to light, from the power of Satan to God. They quoted everything I quote in class from the Hindu newspaper. They kicked the people out. And they said no one else can come in. Why? Because somebody on the outside was sending out something publicly, so the people on the ground, they lost the ability to minister. It might take another generation for missionaries to get in there and give the gospel to people that are in darkness. But you don't say it like that when it goes public. Be careful with what you say and who you say it to and how it works. Yes?
So like how was that type of information shared? Was it like social media?
It was, well, that was put on a website, and also what goes on a website normally goes on a Facebook page, normally goes on a church newsletter. And so all this stuff went out about how the people were in darkness and trapped under Satan. And the Hindus, they're not stupid. Yeah. They have websites, they Google stuff, right? And as you're talking, people are Googling you. So you have to be careful. The other thought is, social media is good, but it can destroy the missionary. We read about this in our book 2 weeks ago. Sometimes, and I was in a Calvary Chapel Asia Missions Conference, and a guy got up and he goes, the worst thing that happens to me now as a receiving missionary, receiving people from America to work in my ministry in an Asian unreached country, the worst thing is they come with their laptops and they spend all day long on social media. And it's like they never left home. They came to the mission field, but they never left home. They don't engage culturally. The people don't know who they are. Their supporters love them because they hear from them all the time. But I ended up sending them home. Now, we read that in our book, if you guys did the readings. That was written like 15 years ago. I heard this guy say it last year. It's a common thing throughout missions today. Don't spend so much time on the newsletter on sharing the vision that you're not with the people. So just a balance in that. One more thing. Last week we talked about being the tip of the spear. So this week I remembered to bring my spear. Wes did this in my church and it changed my life. And he said the missionaries are normally out here. They're the tip of the spear. This part right here that joins, if I can get this to break, that joins the wood to the metal, that's the sending church. That's the missions organization. And all of this is the body of Christ. And when my largest donor, and many of my donors have said the same thing, when they realized that they were just as much a part of what was changing that culture for the power of God, they said it's not just the missionaries or the organization, we are part of that. I am the tip of the spear. And if I don't share with those people, they can't join the ministry and be a part of the work. This helps us tremendously. And now today, my ministry's changed a bit. This is my nationals, Africans and Asians. My role is right here in the middle. I connect the American church by the thousands to a group of people that are now risking their lives overseas. And so my role has changed. I'm no longer living in the field all the time. No, I'm there, I'm risking my life. They know that, I know that. But most of my job is right here in the middle. We are all in this together. So you're the tip of the spear. You must present your ministry and your vision to people to allow them to be a part of it. Let's close with prayer. Lord, as we consider your calling on our life, as we consider the crazy amount of fear and nervousness that fills our hearts when we think about speaking publicly, God, meet us. Give us wisdom. Give us the words to share. Give us the ability to communicate your call to the people that we're ministering to our own lives, and to the people that we're going to overseas. Lord, help us to become the bridge between our home churches and the international church. We love you, Jesus. In your name we pray. Amen.